can help you achieve your weight loss goals. There's limited seating, so get there early. Learn more at markpatrickseminars.com.
It's like getting tomorrow's newspaper today. Joe Thomas in the morning. Seville 107.5 and 1260 WCHV. News, talk, sports.
You got the best radio station going.
And we appreciate you letting us be of service to you with her this morning.
Joe works at the steel mill, works damn near every day. Leaves for work when the sun comes up, drops the kids to school along the way. Joe has everything he dreamed of, all the treasures that he needs. No wonder Joe's always smiling, he only aims to please, yeah. I wanna be your Joe.
On the newsmakers line with us this morning from the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, as you see on the screen, he is Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. Dr. Jasser, welcome back to the program. How are you doing this morning, sir?
Great. It's good to be with you, Joe. Thanks for having me back.
We appreciate your work there, and catch us up. Obviously, a lot of rhetoric has started flying around the GOP primary regarding ISIS, the border security. Islamic residents are concerned because I think misrepresentations of some of what has actually been said have been put forth in order to bring up marches and protests against where perhaps misunderstood. So take us into, first and foremost, how you've been viewing the presidential primaries from the American Islamic Forum for Democracy.
Well, when we look at it, I mean, we're nonpartisan. We don't take sides, but obviously there's the issue of strategic approach to the threat domestically and abroad. And there are some candidates who view that America has a role to play in the world, and there are other candidates who have basically tried to wind back the clock to the mid-20th century paradigm where we basically picked the lesser of evils and took the sides of dictators. So ultimately, I think that from a foreign policy perspective, we're trying to figure out what are the doctrines of each of these candidates. And, what I see happening is the Arab awakening was an opportunity for America to begin to try to move to help the Middle Eastern people move towards a new paradigm, one based on individual rights, universal human rights, and that Islam is in that time in history that Christianity was in the 17th and 18th century when it was fighting against theocracy. So domestically, I think the rhetoric has been obviously over the top at times, but America has some significant fears which are legitimate. And you see what's happening with the refugees in Europe. You see the clash of civilizations that's happening because of the large number of individuals that have been forced to are forcing Europe to deal with their different values, etc., which are absurd. So, even though I have a family that is trying to get out of Syria, I'm also realistic to say that we can't just accept anyone from Syria. We have to have a vetting process that includes whether they're jihadists or not. And currently, despite all the vetting done, none of the ideology is being vetted. So, I take a much stronger security approach to that until we start doing that. And the candidates have not been threading the needle for the most part about smart domestic security, smart vetting, not lumping all Muslims in, because that narrative then becomes really surrender to ISIS narrative that it's really Islam against the West. And I hope in the last few weeks before the actual, last week before the voting starts, we start to see a little smarter policy.
Well, certainly Virginia votes March 1st, I guess, what do they call it, the SEC primaries that day. Dr. Jasser, to that end, look at what, in the lights of what happened New Year's Eve and things like that, where does the American Muslim community that just wants the freedoms that our Constitution and our founding documents bring forth, where do they stand? And we've talked about this in the past. How do we get a moment to stand up and say, listen, this isn't us, and you can't judge us by these folks, because I've got a lot of folks who are saying, well, it's a small percentage that follow Dr. Jasser and a big percentage that follow a very orthodox teachings in the Muslim faith regarding jihad and enforcement of orthodoxy.
Well, I think our movement is growing. I mean, since you and I have talked, our Muslim reform movement has taken off. We had a summit December 4th in which we got together 13 different leaders and many organizations based in Europe, Canada, and the United States, and we made a 2-page declaration of these principles that we believe we can begin to demand that our faith community begin to endorse. We reject the caliphate. We reject all Islamic states and theocracy.
Dr. Jasser, we have to run to a quick break. Hang on the line 1 second.
Charlottesville's #1 source for news and analysis.
Oh, I'd been told hell was going to freeze over.
News Talk 107.5 FM and 1260 AM WCHV.
Taking a look at your CBS 19 Weather Authority forecast, becoming mostly cloudy throughout the day today. Then we'll watch a chance of rain showers move.
Or check them out on the web at BremoAuctions.com. BremoAuctions.com.
Charlottesville Radio's Iron Man.
Luckiest man.
Joe Thomas in the morning. Seville 107.5 and 1260 WCHV. News, talk, sports.
I haven't heard a station anywhere like this one.
We are back with Dr. Zuhdi Jasser from the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. AIFdemocracy.org is the website. Dr. Jasser, thank you again for circling back around with us. We were talking about, with some of the incidents that happened over New Year's and in Europe and some of the reaction of the Europeans to this. One of our congressional candidates has talked about General al-Sisi going and trying to get some, guidance from the centralized leadership in the Muslim community to start, for lack of a better metaphor, get a catechism, as we would in the Catholic faith, from the leadership saying, this isn't it anymore. We've got to start understanding that, your right to a free pursuit of your religion ends when it impacts somebody else. Otherwise, there's going to be, and I keep circling back to this question of how does that juxtapose with the freedoms in the United States. Can you help me with this, Dr. Jasser?
Well, when we were talking before, I was talking about the Muslim reform movement, and we have a declaration which is 2 pages that basically in just 9 points lays out the principles we feel can make our faith, as we interpret it, to be commensurate with freedom and liberty and democracy. And those include the rejection of the caliphate, the rejection of all Islamic states and theocracy, the rejection of institutionalized Sharia, the acceptance of the belief that men and women are equal, the rejection of blasphemy and apostasy laws, and the rejection of violent jihad, and yet the pursuit for secular governance based in the defense of universal human rights, and the belief that all people have an equal right to interpret their faith, and the belief that Muslims don't have a monopoly on heaven. I mean, these are all things that we think that if Muslims sign on, then they're not a threat. If they don't sign on, then they're an obstacle to reforms. They're part of the global Islamist movement. It's easy to talk about basically cozying up to dictators like al-Sisi because, sort of these corporate Islamists have a board of directors, but yet still sort of feed from the same trough of political Islam. They just don't like the grassroots viral movements of ISIS and Muslim Brotherhood because it's almost like the mafia being upset with the gangs on the streets that makes their ideology look bad. So we need to find a third pathway. The al-Sisis of the world talk about reform, but they never use terms like freedom or democracy. They just don't want the al-Qaedas to be killing innocent people, but it's okay if their governments imprison reformers. And you can't do this work that our reform movement is doing in Egypt or in Saudi Arabia, where our so-called allies imprison the moderates, where you can't put movements for democracy and freedom because the fight against theocracy is also a fight against secular dictatorship because it's about freedom and liberty. Sure. And ultimately, that has to be the road that I think Western foreign policy needs to navigate.
What sort of traction are you getting in the mosques here in the United States? Certainly, I don't know about Europe or other parts of the world, but we've always been that, pardon the expression, shining city on the hill of that sort of liberty. What traction are the American mosque leaderships? I think last time we were on, we talked about the Adams Center, and you chuckled about whether they would sign on to it or not here in Northern Virginia. But what sort of response are you getting to this?
Yeah, I mean, what's been great is it's becoming a benchmark for measuring mosque responses. We've had a couple mosques that have signed on. Most are still taking it under advisement. But, the bottom line is that it was interesting. I saw an interview of a reporter in a small station on television in North Dakota in which he had our declaration and was asking the imam about it, and the imam appeared to be open to those ideas, but yet you could tell by his language he wasn't that comfortable with it, and it was just amazing to see that, our reform movement didn't have anybody there, but yet the reporter was using it as a tool to engage the Muslim community. I think that's what we're going to find. We have a group that has started a Facebook page of a reform movement at Chattanooga and is talking to the mosques there. So we're beginning to trickle in responses. We're going to form a spreadsheet, if you will, online at our website at aifdemocracy.org, and our Muslim Reform Movement has a website, muslimreformmovement.org, and we're going to begin to lay out sort of a revelation of what mosques around the country are with us and which ones are obstacles.
Well, and certainly there were points in most theologies where they were violent. I mean, we don't stone women to death for being witches anymore in Christianity. So, each faith comes to the, grips with these demons in its rooting or its interpretation. Dr. Jasser, Bob writes in, it sounds like it's going to be hard for these two to coexist in Europe and in America. Well, but nothing is easy. This is not going to be an easy battle, is it?
Yeah, and I think, what's our strategy? Do we surrender and say that our goal is to block out a quarter of the world's population or try to convert them, or do we actually then work with trying to fast forward their future past the theocracy and work with those Muslims that are with us, that right now are a minority, but ultimately the Arab awakening, I think, has proven that it's not in our DNA, that the 10 million Muslims that went to the streets in Egypt rejected the Brotherhood. The Green Revolution in Iran rejected the Khomeinists. And if America starts weighing in, not militarily but ideologically, I think we can start to help civil society reform and modernize. But if we continue to say, well, the petro-Islam is our allies, then we're basically sentencing Muslims to being under the thumb of theocracy, because we're actually aiding and abetting the continued domination of theocrats.
The old misunderstanding of the enemy of my enemy is my ally expression, Dr. Jasser. Thanks again, of course, author of The Battle for the Soul of Islam as well, aifdemocracy.org. Dr. Jasser, thank you for circling back around with us. I was glad we were able to finish up the conversation. I didn't want to leave it dangling like that. Have a wonderful morning, and we will talk to you again very soon.
Anytime. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser on Joe Thomas.